Podcast, the only podcast designed to fuse your left and right brain hemispheres and feed it the most entertaining and mentally engaging topics on the planet. As we approach our ascent, please make sure your frontal, temporal, and occipital lobes are in their full upright position. As you take your seat of consciousness, relax your senses and allow us to take you on a journey. We are the Intimate Strangers. Thank you for listening.
The Human Experience is in session. My name is Xavier Katana. My guest for tonight is Matthew Kahl. Matt is a U.S. military combat veteran, PTSD survivor, and founder. Matt has been on the front lines of drug policy advocacy and reform in regards to plant medicine and using unorthodox treatment methods to treat PTSD and trauma since 2013. Matt served in the 101st Airborne Division in Afghanistan, where an accident sent him home injured, traumatized, and suffering from crippling PTSD. Matt is the founder of Veterans for Natural Rights, an organization that aims to build community support and resources for veterans that are suffering with PTSD and trauma. He is also the president of the Weed for Warriors Project in Colorado and host of the 1620 show on the Veterans Channel. He is one of the people featured in the documentary we're going to be talking about tonight, From Shock to Awe. Matt, it's such a pleasure. Welcome to HXP.
Thank you for having me.
So Matt, where do we begin? I love the documentary. I got a chance to watch it a couple times, and let's start with a little bit of your background. What led you to choose military service? Why did you decide to do that with your life?
Oh, wow. That is a whole can of worms right there. It's actually not clear at what drove me to military service. I grew up with a father who was a colonel in the Marine Corps, and he's pretty authoritarian in his parenting style, and we just didn't really get along. So I kind of swore off military service early on in my life. But by the time I had a son of my own, I was working in a music recording studio as an audio engineer, and the money was good, but it was intermittent. I'd get a contract, and it'd be great for a little while, and then there'd be a month or two where I didn't have any work, and that kind of lifestyle works well for a single guy, but not so well for people with dependents. So I started examining other options, and one of the things that has been constant in my life is pushing my own boundaries and doing things that I never thought that I would do. And one of those things was kicking down doors, blowing stuff up, and unfortunately, part of the job is killing people. And I really didn't know if I was up to the task, but I was willing to challenge myself to see if I was. So I signed on the dotted line, and I raised my hand, and I swore to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, and was deployed shortly after. But unfortunately, it turns out that not many military people are really charged with supporting and defending the Constitution of the United States. And the oath of enlistment is all but bankrupt in its meaning these days. So there's a definite sense of moral injury when someone who signs up for all the right reasons ends up being a stormtrooper for the empire, essentially.
Yeah.
So moral injury, actual trauma, and then survivor's guilt, I really characterize as three separate things, but they're all very comorbid, and they have a lot of the same symptoms. But the three are very different, but I have all three, definitely, from both of my deployments.
It's incredible. And, let me just thank you for your service, because it's important, I think, to cover, this, and it led you to exploring plant medicine because Western medicine had failed you. You had tried to commit suicide, and you lost all hope, right?
Absolutely. I was completely at below rock bottom. There was no bottom to this hole that I was in. It just kept going down. And I was completely hopeless, bereft of any kind of uh, idea of a normal life. There was not even the inkling of a normal life in my head. I believed that I was a murderer and that I deserved to die.
Huh. You know, I don't think that the human brain, and psychologically, I don't think the human brain is wired to take another life. And so when soldiers come back from combat, they're mostly forgotten about. We forget about our combat veterans, and there's so many suicides that happen, and it's horrifying. What happens to these people that serve our country, and like you said, it's morally bankrupt. So eventually, you came to a point where, how did you hear about ayahuasca? How did you find out about this?
Believe it or not, I actually studied all of the indole-alkylamine hallucinogens slash entheogens in college back in the late 90s. I was a behavioral neuroscience student at Appalachian State University, and I did a lot of my work on the anatomy and how it corresponded to the function of the brain. But I spent all of my spare time researching the psychopharmacology of indole-alkylamines and cannabinoids. So I was kind of well prepared for my life after the service, but I had to overcome my hesitancy to re-engage these substances again. I mean, when you first get out of the military, it's transition is very difficult for almost everyone. They spend so much time teaching you to be a killer, but they don't spend any time to deprogram that killer. And so when I got back to the civilian arena, I was still trying to be the good soldier and still trying to do everything that I was told, everything I was ordered to, which included taking this massive and debilitating regimen of pharmaceutical pills. So this constant stuffing my face full of pills really kept me in a sort of psychological stasis. And I wasn't able to address the trauma or even recognize the trauma that I had undergone, not just in the military, but in my childhood too, believe it or not. The common thread for all of this stuff, whether it's PTSD, suicide, or addiction, is childhood trauma.
Sure.
Dr. Gabor Mate does an amazing piece about how the roots of addiction are based in childhood trauma, and people are trying to medicate the pain away, and they use all of the tools that are readily available but extremely harmful. Things like cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, or in my case, it was the opiate pills and the benzodiazepine pills and all of these other substances that kind of numbed me to the pain, but it also numbed me to the variations and the goods and bads in life. So I was just completely destroyed. My body was starting to fall apart. I gained massive amounts of weight. I was a zombie in every sense of the word. I would fall asleep in the middle of my sentences. I wasn't able to carry a conversation. It was horrible. The quality of life was absolutely terrible. And eventually I had to start looking for other options. And that's really when I stepped outside of the VA system and their method of trying to treat these illnesses, which falls far short. But that the plant medicines are particularly good at treating.
Yeah. We've had Dr. Gabor Mate on the show several times, and I've been such a huge proponent of this research for so long. Rick Doblin's been on the show, Rick Strassman, Dennis McKenna. So this is right down our alley, and everything you're doing with From Shock to Awe. And like I said, I love the documentary because in the beginning it really kind of showcases the pure pain of coming back and trying to reassimilate and being unable to. And then, it changes, it shifts. You can feel this perceptual shift when you get to a point where you drink the tea. And I mean, I want to get into that. Western medicine has failed you. You've tried to commit suicide. Nothing is working for you whatsoever. You get to this place and you're about to drink this hallucinogenic tea, which you've researched, I mean, neurologically. Tell me about that first session. How did it go for you?
Oh, wow. It was absolutely revelatory. I mean, it changed everything. The first session just in itself, and it seemed actually pretty simple at the time. But in actuality, I was sitting there and, he kept coming around with the cups of tea and I kept drinking every booster that was offered. And I think I got up to 4 cups and I was sitting there and I keep, making these faces, trying to like kind of contain my stomach because my stomach started acting up and it was just like, okay, shut up, stomach. We got this. Hold it together. And so, I was kind of like, just making faces in an attempt to kind of keep it down. Mm-hmm. And the facilitator there came by and he said, "Hey, how you doing, man?" And I said, "Well, I'm a little bit uncomfortable, but I'm not really entirely sure. I don't know what I'm supposed to be feeling, really. I don't know what's supposed to be different." And he said, "Okay, we'll try a few more things." And he came around with these little kashakas. They're like palm frond sort of rattles. Mm-hmm. And he spread this like flowery water onto the kashakas and shake them around your head. And there was something about that sound that set me off. And I just couldn't contain it anymore. It just started coming up. And I grabbed the bucket really quickly and I just started hurling as hard as I could into that bucket. And I puked up everything. It was not just the contents of my stomach. It was the contents of my soul for the previous couple of years. And what I found is I was purging out a kind of a demon almost. I looked at the bottom. I could see through my white plastic bucket. I could see the vomit at the bottom of the bucket, and it was dark black. And it just looked like demon to me. So I kind of personified it that way. And I realized, oh man, I just expelled a demon out of me. How the hell did that demon get in there? And then I realized, oh, wait a second. You put that demon in there. So you have wronged yourself by putting this demon in there. And then your entire struggle over the previous couple years has all been an attempt to control this thing that is now imprisoned inside of you. And I keep pushing it back down and pushing it back down and pushing it back down and holding on to it, trying to control it. But it kept bothering me. It kept screwing up my life and getting in the way of a true experience of existence. And once I let it out and into the bucket, then I realized, oh my God, you didn't just do this to yourself. You did that to the demon too. You took this thing that was just like flying out here in the ether and you imprisoned it in your own body. You have violated not just your body, but you have violated the demon's freedom also. And I had to apologize to the demon. And I did. I cried and I said, God, I'm so sorry. How could I have done this? And what do I have to do? How can I make this up to you? And the demon just said, just let it go. Just let it go. And I said, it's not that easy. I can't just let it go. I can't just do that. And he said back to me, yeah, it is. Just let go. And at that moment, it just made a lot of sense to me. And I let go. And at that moment is where you see me stand up and raise my arms to the sky. And I had never felt freer.
Man, wow, it's incredible. I mean, that there is a compound on this planet that, possibly, hypothetically, theoretically, that, indigenous populations have been using for thousands of years. These shamans drink this herbal tea, and maybe they have these vision quests and go and they can diagnose like what's going on with these people spiritually. And then somehow it infiltrates Western culture. I mean, there's this psychedelic renaissance that's happening with plant medicine, ayahuasca, namely ayahuasca. MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, Rick Doblin. I mean, they're at the forefront of this, and I mean, this is why I love the documentary From Shock to Awe so much, is because like I said, we've had so many of these shows now over the 6 years that we've been doing this broadcast. And I remember there was a servicewoman that emailed me once, and she said, Xavier, I've never really considered this ever, but after listening to the show, I'm changing my mind about this. And it really struck me, that, it is possible for this plant to help people, right? And, I want to talk to you about neurologically. I'm sure you know what neurogenesis is, and there are only 3, 4, or 5 handful of compounds that do this in the brain. So tell us about neurogenesis and what's going on in the brain when a person drinks this tea, ayahuasca.
Well, both the beta carbolines, which inhibit monoamine oxidase, and also DMT, they both stimulate neurogenesis in the brain. And it's actually true of most of the indole-alkylamines. Almost every entheogen out there will stimulate new connections and new neuron growth in the brain. So these substances are really taking advantage of a route of healing that has kind of been known to psychology for some time. There's a reason why the SSRIs and the SNRIs, they say that you have to take them for 30 days before you start to feel the effects of it. And that's because it takes about 30 days for those substances to generate new neurons and new neuronal connections. Mm-hmm. So these substances, especially the tryptamines, they tend to jumpstart the process, and you start having massive amounts of neural connection between areas of the brain that are formerly unconnected, and neurogenesis between all of these disparate sections of the brain almost immediately. So ayahuasca, having the dual components of the beta carbolines that inhibit MAO and the DMT, which is a straight tryptamine that stimulates your brain to connect in all kinds of different ways it normally doesn't. These two substances together, probably with a number of other substances that are also in the plants, they serve together in order to create a 1-2 punch to your brain, to really kick it out of all of those bad and negative thought loops that you have become so accustomed to that your ego continually beats you up with. So these things can really change your mind about how you are in relation to your trauma, how your trauma defines you. Most people, when they're really deep in that dark hole, their trauma completely defines them. But when you step outside of yourself with this ego reduction that the tryptamines bring, you can finally see that your trauma doesn't really have much to do with you. It made you who you are, but it does not have to determine who you will be. And you can heal from these things. That's my lesson from the use of all things entheogenic, is that PTSD, trauma, it's curable.
Yeah, I mean, it's so powerful. And I think probably your first session with the tea could probably be branded the I love you session, in all regards. And I think that's a huge part of it, is just remembering that there's love. It is love. And it's capable, it's there. We're capable of reaching it within ourselves. And, so ayahuasca is made of two plants. It's the vine and the leaf, right? And the vine is
Correct.
the MAOI, and the leaf has the DMT.
Uh-huh.
But there are all
Correct.
kinds of alkaloids that are in the plants themselves.
Yeah, correct. Especially in the vine itself is the MAOI. So there's all kinds of beta carbolines in there. There is harmine, there's harmane, there's harmalol, there's tetrahydroharmine, there's tetrahydroharmalol. There are dozens of different entourage elements in this plant, and they all add up to some kind of monoaminergic inhibition. And they simply take your enzyme that normally breaks down things like serotonin or anything that looks like it, and it inhibits that enzyme. Then in the chacruna is the leaf, and it's from a different bush in the Amazon. And chacruna has dimethyltryptamine in it. It also has N-methyltryptamine, and a number of other entourage elements in there with it that are similar to DMT. But DMT is the primary alkaloid. DMT is possibly one of the most visual hallucinogens on the face of the planet. It is an extremely potent experience, especially by itself too. But it's very short-lived because of the monoamine oxidase enzyme. If some people have been known to extract DMT from either chacruna or Mimosa hostilis. There's several other plants, Acacia confusa, that all have high levels of DMT. So this is everywhere in nature. DMT is one of the most ubiquitous chemical substances on the face of planet Earth. It's present in so many species, hundreds and hundreds of plants, and at least dozens of animals. So we take these two substances, the chacruna, the bush in the Amazon, and then the vine, the ayahuasca vine.
The cappy vine, right?
Yeah, Banisteriopsis caapi.
Yes.
And so you could combine these two ingredients, and the caapi inhibits your enzyme, so the DMT can actually reach your bloodstream, and then you have a relatively long-lasting DMT experience. So the DMT, whereas normally if smoked, can go to your brain and disappear in a matter of 15, 20 minutes, the MAOI allows it to persist in your bloodstream for 2 to 3 hours. So you have a lot more time to sort of interface with the chemical and go to this place where you renegotiate your relationship to your ego and renegotiate your relationship to your trauma, and then bring something back that you can apply to your everyday life that will then change you forevermore.
It's so incredible to me, Matt, like this exists and we have access to it. The only problem is it seems like, these pharmaceutical companies and drug policy is completely backwards. I mean, this is illegal by law, and most people are flying down to South America just to access this. They're they're struggling to find it. What's going on with drug policy right now? Is it just this corporate banker thing where they're just trying to farm humans, farm our suffering, keep us sort of addicted to these pharmaceutical drugs? What's going on with drug policy and its reform? I mean, we're starting to see a bit of reform very slowly, but it seems to me the drug war is an abject failure. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I mean, it does nothing but criminalize the population of the United States and indeed the population of the entire world. I mean, if you are guilty of using a substance that doesn't happen to be on the approved list in order to improve your life, then you're a criminal, period. So it's not really a war on drugs. It's a war on people. It's a war on the citizens of the United States and of the world.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it was the Controlled Substances Act, 1971, Richard Nixon, and then the Reagan administration and their campaign, Just Say No. It's amazing where we have sort of ended up. And, I'm so glad there are organizations such as yours and what you guys are doing, especially for veterans, because, I mean, here are people that go, to serve our country, and perhaps they don't know what they're getting into. Perhaps they're going over there because out of necessity. Perhaps they just can't afford to do anything else. They can't afford to go to college, yet until they serve. And they come back and they're broken in pieces. And, it doesn't just have to be veterans. Many people go through this. Many people are walking around with trauma. And as you said, in the work
Absolutely.
The work of Dr. Gabor Mate, we carry around this childhood, trauma for our whole lives. And, it seems like we're just searching for something, anything. And ayahuasca, plant medicine, seems to be that thing right now.
I think that, especially you hit on an amazing point there. The fact that trauma is the one thing that really ties us all together. It doesn't really matter who you are. There's some kind of traumatic experience in your past that you could benefit from facing, feeling, and then moving through. So combat veterans, universally, they tend to also have a little bit of childhood trauma. That's usually the predictor for what adult PTSD is. So if you have a little bit of childhood trauma and then you have the military trauma on top of it, the military trauma is really just the thing that cracks the egg open. And then once the egg is open, the yolk flies everywhere and you can't put it all back inside. So that's what I found with my own trauma, is the fact that the military trauma just really, I found that the veins and the roots of it went so deep into my being that they didn't just stop with the military. It went all the way back to early childhood. And I think that that's something that we all feel to some degree or another. We have 22 veterans at the upper end that are committing suicide every day, and maybe about 39 who are overdosing every day and dying from as a result of the overdose. But if you look at the larger numbers, it's about 121 individuals in America today that are committing suicide every day. 22 is a minority of that. And granted, veterans are a tiny minority of the population. We definitely have an outsized influence on that number. But the fact is the vast majority of trauma is in the civilian population. And with addiction and overdose, you're talking about 198 people dying. That's ridiculous. Every single day, 121 from suicide and 198 from addiction and overdose. So that total, you're getting about 320 people a day who are dying from untreated trauma. That's it. That's the bottom line. Untreated trauma is what is causing this massive, not only human toll, but societal toll and economic toll. How many days are lost because somebody just can't pull it together enough in order to go to work? How many days are lost? How much productivity is lost because somebody loses a job because they keep screwing it up because they just can't handle it because of their trauma? How much of the crime in America is actually caused by criminals who are simply acting out the trauma that was done to them at a very early age? What kind of economic and social impact could we have if we started opening these medicines up to all people, regardless of what their background is? Veterans, we're the poster boys for PTSD right now, but it's our job to call attention to the fact that the main repository of trauma in our society is in the civilian side. And we all deserve recognition for our pain, and nobody's pain is any more important than anybody else's.
Yeah, wow, such a powerful statement. I think you mentioned it a little bit earlier when you were talking about your journey, and you said there was something about using the opiates that numbed the pain for you. And I've been there. I remember after my first session, and I never drank again. But in a world where alcohol is available on every street corner, and it just seems like it's resistant to this healing aspect of things. And, I think it's so important that we recognize, we change the perception of these compounds, because I think some people, they hear ayahuasca or psychedelics, which I'm not really fond of that word, but they hear about this and they turn off. It's like a switch. But I mean, it's obvious that this is helping people, and like you said, this comes down. It's not just your service that you looked back at and saw that there's trauma here. It went back all the way to your childhood, and it affected something deep down in your soul.
Yeah, and I really think that that's sort of the crux of it. Veterans, like I said, we are the poster boys for PTSD right now, and love us or hate us, we're natural leaders. So we get back to civilian life, and if we find something that works for us, there's not many veterans that are going to just shut up and like go melt away into a corner. We're going to start speaking up about it because, hey, this works, guys. I don't want another one of my brothers or sisters to die. So please, please, please listen and take advantage of these methods of healing. So that is really where the veteran kind of fits into the whole drug war agenda, is the fact that we have a unique voice and we can speak to a certain segment of the population that normally is completely unfazed by any sort of argument pro psychedelics. Namely, that it's the conservative side of the spectrum. Mm-hmm. The fact remains is that veterans, we have raised our hand and we have pledged our life to the support and defense of the Constitution of the United States and also to the people of America. And there are not many conservatives out there who will deny that. And they will, even if they disagree, they're at least going to listen. They're going to give us a chance to say our piece. And I've really taken advantage of that by going into the capitals of state governments and also national governments. I actually held a congressional brief in the U.S. Capitol in D.C. on December 12th, where I talked about psychedelics as treatment for PTSD. Myself and another veteran, too. His name is Jonathan Lubecky, and he was part of the MDMA trials. So, there is some small change happening, but I really believe that veterans are going to be the linchpin. We're really the tip of the spear on this. We are pushing the idea of plant medicine right up into the centers of power in Washington, D.C. and every state capital across the nation.
Yeah, it's amazing. And, I applaud you for your work and doing this and bringing it to the mainstream, as it were. Can you imagine if there were, ayahuasca centers on every street corner instead of alcohol just available freely? I mean, and people could access this and maybe treat, some of that struggle and find, healing, true healing. And it wasn't just, you found healing in the family aspect as well. Can you talk a little bit about, how it helped you in your connection to your family and your sort of everyday life and your connection to your wife and your kids?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you have a psychedelic experience or an entheogenic experience, however you want to term it, you are basically shown an open door, which leads you to a vision of how things could be. But psychedelics themselves aren't the answer. Psychedelics can show you the way, but really the work has to be done in your everyday life. You have to start making changes in the way you actually live your life, the way you think from moment to moment, the way you react to certain triggers and stimuli. You have to change that on a basic fundamental level in order for you to get better. And that's what they talk about, quote, doing the work. There's a lot of people that go to the psychedelics and then afterwards they have to do the work. And doing the work involves changing the way you interact with your experience, interact with reality, interact with life. So I had to immediately start reviewing almost everything that I did in life. And believe it or not, it wasn't just ayahuasca that I pursued. As soon as I tried ayahuasca, I realized that these things can really work. And I determined that I need to know everything there is to know about all of the indole alkylamine entheogens. And so A month after I took ayahuasca on From Shock to Awe, I went down to Peru and I recorded a movie called Soldiers of the Vine, which is available for free on YouTube. And then a month after that, I went down to Mexico and I took ibogaine and also toad, which is 5-methoxy-DMT. A month after that, I was exploring peyote here in the States. And a month after that, I was trying mushrooms under the guidance of a gringo. 2016 was a bit of a crazy year for me, but I emerged from 2016 a completely different person with a completely different relationship to my trauma. My trauma no longer determined who I was as a person. It was simply something that was a part of the greater whole.
Yeah.
So, anyway, so the point being is that these substances can really catalyze profound changes in your life, but you have to be willing to do the work in between. You can't just go back to your old habits and your old ways of interacting with the universe around you. You have to actually change. And one of the ways that I started changing is I started re-engaging my family in a huge way. My son was born just before military service. And then when I got into the military, I was never there. I was gone from sun up to sundown, training. And then a few months after that, I was deployed for almost, a year and a quarter. And then I was home for a few months, and then I deployed again for another year. Except that time I got medevaced. And when I got medevaced, it was even worse because I was home, but I was on all these medications. So I was really, truly absent. I was completely messed up in the head, and I was a zombie. I was drooling on myself. I couldn't hold a conversation. There was no way that I could actually father my children. I couldn't be there for them. So I was absent for their entire childhood. And it really, really messed with me. And I talk about it a lot in the film. But what the medicine led me back to is the fact that I needed to rebuild my relationship with them. And I needed to start from ground one, like the ground level, And so the first thing I started to do was re-engage with my wife. And even though I was re-engaging with my wife, I was still doing all of these other things that had been important to my healing up to that point, which is like helping other veterans. And it's really just recently, just within the past year, that I decided that I needed to really start fixing all the lack of attention that my kids had gotten from me. So in August of last year, I actually pulled my oldest son out of school and I started homeschooling him. And believe it or not, I have completely rearranged our relationship, and I have a completely new understanding and appreciation for who he is as a human being. I don't yell at him anymore. We just talk, and we talk about everything. We talk about school, and we talk about friends, and we talk about girls, and we talk about hopes and dreams, and we talk about the future. We talk about college. We talk about life. And it's wonderful. It's completely changed my own feeling about myself and my feeling about myself in relationship to my family too.
Yeah, I mean, that's so powerful, man. I love your words. I love that. I love what you said about you can't be lazy about this. It's not like this cure-all. There is no magic pill. You don't show up to a session and suddenly you're just sort of healed and you kind of move around and that's it. You have to, as you said, you have to do the work. You have to take it very seriously. I mean, it is very serious. And I think for me, the tea showed me so much, and I would classify my life as, pre-ayahuasca and post-ayahuasca, just flat out. And it took me a long time just to be able to talk about some of the things, and I don't remember when I cried, the last time that I had cried, and my first session, it was like my face was a wet, sloppy mess. And and what you said about purging, I think is so on point. There's something about it that is almost spiritual. I think maybe it does go in there. If your cells store memory, if they store trauma, maybe it kind of finds those things, those attachments, those demons, and then it's out of you, and it's such a powerful experience, in every angle, in every facet. But, as you said, I think we have to be ready to do the work within ourselves. And I'm so glad for you that the relationship between you and your son has evolved. And, I think it's about the collective. It's about the network that we create around us. It's not just about the just individually us and our own evolution, but it's also the evolution of, our family and the people that we care about and our friends and the reason that I do this show, to be honest.
Yeah, it's the evolution of everyone that you come into contact with, because each time that you take a step forward, you're kind of pulling along everyone that is on the ride with you.
Yeah.
There's no other way to really describe it, but the fact that I have found this way out of a deep, dark hole, this horrible, horrific trauma, has basically created a roadmap by which hundreds, maybe thousands of other people are now first starting to take their own steps on that path.
I love it, man. And there's a quote that of yours that I really like that I found it. No one is free in America so long as nature is legal. And it's so true,
Absolutely, because if nature is illegal, then what the heck is freedom to us? Like, if I can't plant a seed in the ground, watch it grow, and then use it in order to feed, clothe, or medicate myself, then I am not free. Period. There is no kind of reality in which a person is free who can't simply put a seed into the ground. We are under a completely backward and totalitarian and tyrannical edict and regime that creates these restrictions upon us. We are living in a jail in which we're not allowed to touch certain parts of nature. And I cannot abide by that, period. I swore to support and defend the United States Constitution. And when I read through the United States Constitution, what it tells me is that it was created to restrict powers of government and not the people. It was designed to protect the rights of the people to do anything they want so long as they hurt no one else. So if I decide to drink a tea from an Amazonian jungle plant, so be it. That should be completely within our rights and priorities as individual human beings. And there is nothing in the world that should come between us and nature.
I love it. I love it so much, and I couldn't agree more. I think the current system is absolutely archaic, and I can't see a reason for it to exist the way it does other than to enslave humanity. And it's time for us to do something about that. Matt, we've got about 15 minutes left, and I really want to reach out to the people. Maybe there's a veteran that's going to hear this and maybe they're on the fence about this, or there's a person that is struggling from this internal pain. I mean, what's your sort of takeaway from this whole journey that you've been on? And what do you say to that veteran, your brother, sister, whatever it may be? What do you say to these people that are suffering out there and they just can't seem to find, that thing that works for them?
I think I would say you need to live for yourself and not for other people, because so many of us are stuck within the prison bars that society and other people have created around us and our own minds. And you need to step outside that box. That box, it was made by other people for you, but it's not your box. You need to find out where you actually live, where you can actually go as a human being. Not just bodily, but mentally too. If cognitive freedom is not a right guaranteed by the Constitution, then I think Terence McKenna said it, that it's not worth the hemp that it was written on.
Right.
The Constitution is not worth the hemp it was written on. So I think that if you are on the fence about these treatments, you don't need to be. I know Green Berets, I know SEAL Team 6 members who are using indole-alkylamine entheogens to improve their lives and to get over trauma that they have incurred as a result of service and as a result of their childhood. I know people in Delta Force, people in CAG, who are actually exploring their own minds and their own souls with the help of these plants and these substances. So if you're on the fence about it, don't be. These things are very well proven with thousands of years of use. And the fact is Western medicine, it's like a child. It's like a screaming baby, and it has no idea how to use all of these appendages that are given to it. There is so much more that your mind is capable of, and there's so much more that your body is capable of. There's so much more that you are capable of. And these plants, they're simply the beginning of it. They will show you the way, but you have to walk that path yourself.
Indeed, my friend. And what about the people who haven't served at all? The people who haven't served in the military, and perhaps they're suffering. As you noted in your story, this goes back to childhood. I mean, Dr. Gabor Mate's work, which I think is revolutionary, and he talks about how we carry around these traumas for our whole lives, and we never truly face them. Whether they're abandonment issues or something else, we never really address them. No one really ever asks us, what happened to you as a child? What happened to you? And so let's talk about that a little bit, and then we'll wrap up. But what do you say to someone who hasn't served at all?
Yeah, I mean, we spend our whole lives avoiding these topics. I mean, if something bad happened to you when you were a kid and somebody asks you about it when you're an adult, oh, you totally gloss over it. You're like, yeah, man, it was a messed up thing. And, my dad was totally absent or angry and he hit me, or my uncle touched me wrong. There's all these different things that happen to us, but that we don't really incorporate. We don't actually integrate them into our personality. We push them away and we lock them into a deep, dark closet somewhere. And we use all kinds of defense mechanisms in order to avoid talking about these things, whether it's self-deprecating humor or it is a simple avoidance. There are so many different tactics that we use to try to erase these things out of our history. But the only way to really, truly reconcile these things and reintegrate them into the whole of your being is to truly sit there and delve into them, experience them fully. And then just like the rain clouds come and go, so will these memories and so will these traumas. So the clouds may come and obscure the sun for a brief moment, but that eventually the clouds will go away and the sun will shine again.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry to bump you there. Go ahead.
No, but another thing I would like to tell the people who have never been to combat, listen, when I first got out of the military, I had a very common prejudice that is present in a lot of infantrymen. I mean, our job is to kick down doors, blow stuff up, and kill people straight up. This is like Trauma 101. And I started realizing, I got out of the service and I was really mad at the people who claimed to have PTSD, but never really did any of the stuff that I did. And I had a prejudice against them. But gradually, in the process of my advocacy, I would sit down with some of these people and I would say, all right, man, like what really happened to you? And they would say things like, listen, I didn't really do anything like you did. I can't even imagine what it's like being you. But let me tell you what happened to me. And then they would tell me this story, and half the time my jaw would hit the floor, and I would come out of that conversation thinking to myself, how the heck did you deal with that? I have no experience in being able to try to pull myself together after an experience like that. Some of these are horrific, horrific trauma. It could be being kidnapped and systematically tortured. It could be a rape or a number of rapes over a long period of time. This betrayal by authority figures and people that you're supposed to trust. I have no idea how some of these people pull themselves together after this. And so I still have to tell people, yeah, you may not have kicked down some doors and blown stuff up and killed people, but your trauma is just as important as mine is. And don't ever, ever, ever let anyone tell you anything different.
Yeah, for sure. Matt, there's a question that I really, really like, and it's from Cosmos of Compassion, and they ask, if one has a rough mental history, psychotic breaks, is there ever a chance for such people to use plant medicine? Having such a bad history, will I ever be approved plant medicine?
If you have genuine psychosis in your background, like psychotic breaks, I think that the chances that you would experience a psychotic break under the influence of some of these substances might be slightly higher. So definitely proceed with caution. I think that there are a lot of people who advise those with histories with psychosis to never engage in any of these substances. But personally, I have had a psychotic break. There was a period of time where I didn't sleep for over a week in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and I was imagining Taliban outside my window flitting around in the shadows, and I would routinely go and clear my house with a firearm and then clear the outside of my house with that same firearm. And I was not right in the head. I was imagining things. I was legitimate, I think, psychotic. It felt like I was going crazy. So the fact that I have been able to at least come to a different portion of my life, all of those incidences are way far in the past. I have been able to use these medicines to help fix myself so that that kind of thing never happens again. I think it depends on the person, really. And you really have to proceed with caution if you are prone to psychotic breaks and there are no substances involved. Like, let's say you turned 18 and you just had a schizophrenic attack, and you weren't on any sort of medications or drugs or anything like that. You are at risk for being for undergoing a psychotic break while underneath the influence of these substances. But if you had some kind of incident in your past in which you may have imagined things or heard voices or something like that, especially under the influence of medication, then if you eliminate the medication, then more than likely you're going to be able to eliminate the psychotic symptoms, and you can then re-engage with some of these tryptamine substances in a safe manner.
Yeah, I mean, I like that answer, and proceed with caution, I think, is the general rule. And we are not medical professionals, and we're not pretending to be. So
and
make sure
nothing constitutes medical advice here. So
this is for entertainment purposes only, and your information. So please, proceed with caution and make sure that you're making wise choices and decisions with your mental health and what you decide to do with your body. Matt,
I think one of the most important things also is to have someone around that you trust that can monitor you for these kinds of symptoms. So if you are undergoing a psychedelic experience, having someone that you know, love, and trust that is close to you that can help you through these things, and then also tell you if you're starting to slip. And having them available is extremely important.
Yeah, and if these compounds weren't illegal, people wouldn't be trying to order them on the internet and cooking them in their kitchens, and then maybe jumping out of windows or something because they're not guided by a shaman or someone trained to do this. Do not do this by yourself. I think people ask me, they they think, it's something that they can do just sitting alone in their living room. I do not recommend this whatsoever. Do not order it on the internet. Go to someone that is trained in guiding you through a session, because there is an integration period that you need. You need to be able to talk about your experience. Is so important. A friend of mine tried to cook it in his kitchen. He was like burning incense, like drawing like war paint on his body. It was not a healthy thing for him to go through that.
Yeah, I think the vast majority of people could benefit from having either a trip sitter or a trusted friend together, or both. Honestly, I think that these things can work in concert and provide layers of protection for you. There's another thing that you really need to do when undergoing any sort of psychedelic experience is sort of develop a spiritual practice of your own. It doesn't need to be anything from any major religion. It can just be stuff that you pull from several different religions, things that resonate with you, things that make sense, and they make you feel good and they ground you. So having this sort of ritualized approach to entheogenic exploration can be extremely valuable. But I also want to say that there is so much focus these days on integration and having a proper shaman and all this stuff. And, believe it or not, all of the best shamans that I have ever come across have said, I don't do anything. The medicine does it in concert with you. And actually, they're just providing the safe space. They're just simply containing the area and letting whatever comes out come out. And I think that there is intrinsic value to these substances, whether it's ayahuasca or even just plain DMT or 5-methoxy-DMT, toad, bufo, mescaline with San Pedro and peyote. I think there's intrinsic value to mushrooms and psilocybin. I think there's intrinsic value to all kinds of different plant medicines. You can do these things, yes, alone, but those things are for the advanced practitioner only. Very, very important. I think that the vast majority of people could benefit from using some kind of support system, whether it's a shaman and a trusted friend, or a shaman and a trusted friend and a psychotherapist to talk about all of your experiences with afterwards. Because you got to unpack everything. Your shaman is going to be there, or your facilitator is going to be there through the experience, and they're going to let you talk about it a little bit afterwards. But really, you're going to really start unpacking everything that just happened to you over the months and years after your experience, not in the 24 hours afterwards. So it will continue to develop layers of meaning as you go on and you experience more of life. You'll start to realize how different things that you learned are more applicable to each individual situation.
Indeed. And, I think I've heard, something like it's years of therapy in one sitting, one session. And I would agree with that. So, I think there's a lot to unpack there. Matt, I think we're out of time, man. Where can people find, your work? Where can people find From Shock to Awe? Tell us how we can get there and watch the documentary, please.
You can find a link to all of the ancillary materials for From Shock to Awe at FromShockToAwe.com. And you can actually rent the movie itself from Amazon Prime, from Google Play, and I think you can also do it from iTunes. So you can actually watch the full 1.5 to 2 hour movie if you'd like for a nominal fee. And you can find me, at least online. I've actually divorced myself from Facebook recently.
Nice.
But I still run the organization called Veterans for Natural Rights, and it's found on Facebook, it's found on Instagram, it's found on a bunch of different platforms. You can follow me and my activities there. You can also go to the website, veteransfornaturalrights.org.
Perfect.
And there you'll find trailers for the 1620 series, which is more about cannabis and how it helps pull us out of the pharmaceutical hell. And also you'll find links to From Shock to Awe trailers there, and Soldiers of the Vine, which is a full hour and 10-minute movie about ayahuasca as healing for PTSD.
Yeah, wow, Matt. I really want to thank you for your service in on all levels. I mean, it's so important, the work that you're doing here. Guys, that's going to do it for us. I mean, what a show. What an amazing, thing to learn about ayahuasca, and plant medicine is something very close to my heart. And I truly believe if there's anything that's going to turn things around here on the planet, it's probably going to be plant medicine. So I hope you guys enjoyed this broadcast. We will be back next week with yet another show. If you are subscribed to us on YouTube, make sure you click the like button. If you are listening to the podcast version of this, please get over to iTunes, leave us a review. Please make sure you share this broadcast with your friends, family, people you care about. Thank you so much for listening. We will be back next week.